It's time to start this conversation. It's my privilege and immense pleasure to introduce Samer Faraj. Samer is a professor at McGill University. He's a chair of Canada in the domain of technology, innovation, and organizing. Samer is also the director of the PhD program at McGill. And most of his work is on complex collaboration in ecosystem and in particular in online communities and also in a health ecosystem. Samer is one of the most cited scholars in management in Canada. And I must confess that I read with immense pleasure what he wrote, and he has been a source of inspiration for Mosaic, for my colleagues, and for our community. Today, Samer is going to talk about innovation and community in the COVID area. I think Samer would introduce some elements about artificial intelligence and organizing in this talk, and maybe explain how artificial intelligence could be useful, for instance, for communities online to be more efficient. So Samer, thanks so much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, Lucie, and all the organizers. And it's a pleasure to be here. When I was invited to speak, I wasn't sure what to emphasize. There's so many things we could talk about. And at the last minute, I decided not to say much about artificial intelligence. Patrick, I hope you don't mind. I think I have a lot more to say about communities of innovation, so I thought that's enough to get us started. So I'm going to share my slides now, and I hope, as always, that technology works. Miracles do happen, and I think you're seeing my slides.
Yeah.
So thank you all, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Summer School for Mosaic. This is a wonderful effort. You know, I've always been very impressed by the creativity involved, the kind of people that are brought in, and the kind of participants from all over the world that join. It's really a cutting-edge program, and one of the most useful that I know of. So what I want to talk about is this idea, these words, innovation, community, whether we can link them together, ecosystems, and then try to say something about what happens in the COVID era and what we have learned from the COVID breach. So starting with a very quick review of kind of the original, I guess, the péché originel, when in the 60s people study and 70s people looked at Route 128 and Silicon Valley, and they found a lot of synergies and positive reinforcements happening within two regions of the United States. So and then there was people tried comparison and found that the Route 128 ecosystem was kind of only partially successful due to a lot of secrecy and unwillingness to partner with others. And Silicon Valley, by being more open and decentralized, and people were willing to take risks and partner with different like new actors, were able to kind of be more successful. So, and there was a synergy between investment bankers, venture firms, legal firms, kind of the university labs and so on. So so Silicon Valley became the exemplar for innovation ecosystems. And today we're still trying to recreate this. every city worthy of its, of its name or of a certain size wants to be the Silicon Valley of the future, and Montreal and Barcelona are no exception among many other cities. So we, since that original work, there has been a lot of attempts to understand what is it that we need to achieve an ecosystem, or whatever that positive is that the ecosystem brings. So on the top left, you have an original framework that says it's just you need to marry academia, industry, and government, and you have to look at the relationship between them. And then we have on the right side, people have said, well, wait a minute, you've forgotten the citizens, so let's add the citizens to the mix. And so it becomes a quadruple helix. There have been more recent quintuple helix and so on, and people keep expanding these models. Something can be learned by looking at the literature on smart cities. And there it's this emphasis of infrastructure and kind of at the bottom, that basically to have a smart city, and again, a smart city is an innovative city. There's a lot of overlap with what we are talking about. It's just a term started from with geographers and policy people, so it's stuck. And so you need collaborative ecosystems, and that is the kind of, you can see on the graph here, collaborative ecosystem. You see collaboration, creativity, the things we are talking about, and there have been versions of this model and variants of this model. It seems like we have as many models as there are researchers in the space. So when we look at this concept, when we look at this kind of what is an innovation ecosystem, so a lot of the original analogy came from the natural ecosystem, the animals, the flora, the fauna, and how they kind of each piece of that ecosystem has to work well together. Nowadays, there's a recognition that there's basically two major streams. One is a literature on strategy and business coming out of mainly management schools, like how do you as a firm engage, or kind of how do you take advantage, or how do you build one, and so on. And there's a broader policy and institutional point of view, which is the one where policymakers favors. They see that it brings a lot of economic value, and then how do we, as policymakers or mayors or kind of people in an institutional role, kind of help build that ecosystem. And I may mention Montreal because that's a city I know most locally. And basically every elected official or unelected official wants to help create this ecosystem. And then when AI comes along, you can say, all right, we're going to create an AI ecosystem. So the bottom line is, when you participate in an ecosystem, you have, and you have to love these euphemisms, you have to emphasize, you have to put aside for a moment the immediate value capture, which is simply a term for short-term profits or profitability. And you try to realize that by building the ecosystem, you have better long-term prospects than if you try to kind of immediately monetize or profit from the situation. So as you can see, I have a couple of definitions here, simply that we went from, that's one of the original definitions by Moore, which is highly focused on the firm and how they create kind of that capability, to one, a more recent definition just came out last year, based on a review of the literature that says basically, it's as simple as you have to have actors, you have to have activities that bind the actors, you have artifacts that are used in those relationships, and that triumvirate is the key. the focus is on the whole population or the global performance, not your just one firm's performance. So beyond these definitional squabbles, how do you build an ecosystem is the question that's on everybody's mind. And again, taking a somewhat contrarian view, tongue-in-cheek in this presentation, so remember that part. We're going to look at what people have been doing. So this is kind of in Montreal. Montreal wants to be one of the top 20 cities in terms of innovation in the world. And so this is a nonprofit that kind of decided the best way to help out in Montreal is to create what they called a radar, a startup radar, which is you can use to find who is doing what and who you need to contact and so on. So it's a data platform to help with that. So if you look at it, this is kind of it's a map of the world, of the Montreal world. It's a division in categories, a typology. And if I want to, for example, if I'm looking for, I don't know, co-working spaces, I need to, or a cluster or a government program, I know where to go here. And in terms of co-working, they give me a very useful breakdown of who's available, where I could go. So at Workbase, it's where I could go if I need space. And Espace Beaubien is another on the right side, and so on. So this is very helpful if you're getting started. So, and then they allow you also to do a search. For example, I just did a search on that page. So I'm interested in artificial intelligence. I'm interested to see which firms have gotten seed funding. Well, I plug in that criteria in the filters, and I get 12 companies that are in AI and have achieved seed funding. So it's a very effective description of the what's happening, what is, who and what, basically is how I would call it. Then you got something else, something that at the federal level in Canada, something called Explore IP. So Explore IP is this, kind of as is typical in federal government things. They tend to be very broad, very action-oriented, and it solves a problem that many decision makers think is an important problem in Canada. Universities produce IP, and it's hard for firms to find them. It's hard for firms to know, that this little patent that Professor X filed for could be something really important for them, or it solves a problem that they have. So again, with the idea of matching and sharing the information, they built a site, and here I clicked on, they have, again, these graphical tools are the rage nowadays. So I clicked on McGill. McGill has 144 inventions in 28 technology topics, and the circles in the center are the technology topics, the various topics. And one of the red ones is the instrument and measurement, and there are 25 inventions in it. And if you go on the exterior of the circle, you will find other universities. So these are all the various Canadian universities. So very useful for, again, helping solve the problem of, what are the new inventions available for me to license from the industry perspective. So all these things point to the, that's the easy stuff, right? This is the mapping, the categorization, the giving people the ability to find information has been the easy stuff. But how do we ensure that actual collaboration takes place? And it remains the essential problem, right, that we face. And so if we go beyond these maps and descriptions and data representations and these typologies, so you can, you can solve the problem of how do I find others, how do I look up their information, how do I match industry and universities, but how do we go toward tie actualization, meaning going from a potential tie, which all these things represent potential ties for us. How do we go from there to actually something that is going on and where the actors are all engaged collaboratively, right? So, one of the things you do notice in all the description of ecosystems is the issue of value destruction that could emerge. So if we were in the, let me explain. If we were in the ecosystem of moving people from place A to place B, right? That idea that people need to get places. If I'm a taxi company, a traditional taxi company, I may suffer value destruction from this innovation wave, right? And Uber may benefit, right? Uber type organization. So we often don't mention that there are actors who will suffer. What, again, the euphemism is value destruction, but basically will lose their shirt from the development of that ecosystem. So that's one thing that I want to revisit later after we talk about COVID. So we have emphasized local ecosystems, but there are ways to emphasize global ecosystems. There are many ways, and I want to mention one of them, which I think is very interesting. This idea of prizes, right? So you all, I'm sure, are familiar with the X Prize phenomena that you can put up money to the first company that or group of people that solves a painful or a stubborn problem, right? So here we have, 100 million prize on top left for who can kind of help remove basically the carbon, the extra carbon that the humans have been emitting in the atmosphere. And Elon Musk and his foundation are willing to give $100 million for it. And it is the largest prize in history so far. Next one is kind of, is more specific, but how do you produce chicken breast or fish fillet alternatives from, not from animals? Again, it's a $15 million competition and so on. The rapid COVID testing is on the right, $6 million. And you can see each of those prizes is kind of married to some sort of corporation or foundation for the money. The money has to appear from somewhere. So if we look at the last one, the $5 million IBM Watson AI X Prize, so it's a different cut to that ecosystem because it's worldwide, right? So this is what they just announced. This is just a couple of days ago. And so it's aiming at creating a worldwide ecosystem of people interested in using AI for the benefit of mankind, right? It's not necessarily a for-profit thing, even though these discoveries could lead to the formation of corporations, but the whole point is to emphasize socially meaningful goals. So all of them use AI to predict things. So the first one, the winner is said we could eliminate malaria by using AI to build models of how many small water bodies will form based on rain patterns, and then we can optimize the kind of the launching of larviciding campaigns. The second one is about fighting human trafficking, and again using analytical tools to rapidly find traffickers and recover victims. The last one is out of Montreal, and it's trying to create a clinical decision support system for mental health. So it used kind of the IBM Watson Health database to create a pattern of observations on which you can then act, based on the specific patient symptoms you encounter locally. So that's another way to look at ecosystems. It's a transversal way to look at ecosystems. I will move on now to what COVID has done for us, because COVID has affected how we look at innovation. And so there have been a few things that COVID has exposed. One is kind of how we are reliant on digital infrastructure, but digital infrastructure is not available for all, right? So for the rural areas who have low bandwidth, for the poor or the indigent who have no access or low access, or even organizations that have poor connectivity, the shift to the online has not been easy. And we also discovered that there are many things ranging from a bus pass or an ID or things of that nature that are not easy to move. So the analog persists even in digitization, right? Your passport, for example, cannot be digital. So we have all heard stories about digitalization, which broke. For example, AI and supply chain programs have been very good at predicting, like how to run a supply chain has been very good, but it's mainly been based on historic data. And the pandemic has been an ahistorical event. So we have had surges in demand. If you remember the toilet paper crisis, the hand sanitizer disappearing, and so on. So our systems are brittle because they're based on historic data. And finally, we have the increased panoptical surveillance. If you remember, some of you may be students, you may have had university want to make sure it's you when you take your exam, or you may be a professor wanting to make sure that it's your students are the ones taking the exam. But that has led to basically a broadening of surveillance to include the home. And that has led to lots of debates about, where's privacy in all of this? How much can an employer emphasize in terms of transparency? So we remember the COVID crisis through these very painful moments. In retrospect, Quebec, like many other places, was hard hit by the crisis, unexpected. What was needed, the worst was in the retirement homes. And the government typically likes to run things, likes to be in charge. But for this one, out of necessity, of course, they melted a lot of the bureaucratic reasoning, and they went with creative solutions like getting the army in there to help out with the nursing homes, asking for volunteers to just step up and come and help, and things like that. So in crisis, we should be able to see more of a community response and more of even an acceptance by traditional bureaucracies of the need to do things differently. So let's talk about the role of innovation communities. It started with this piece of news that on January 10th, a consortium led by Professor Yongzhen Zhang of Fudan University posted in a virology online database a map of the genome of the virus. That was what turbocharged all the efforts worldwide to look for a vaccine and try to understand what is going on. So this is kind of an understanding that this is too serious to profit from, and you need to share all the information that is needed. And indeed, it took the vaccine makers less than 2 months after this genome was posted for them to develop their first concoction of the vaccine. Moderna did it 42 days after this was posted. So there have been a lot of communal responses. This is just randomly, the European Union has a whole website on how can you help, how can you contribute, how can you share your solution. It's just one of many, many responses of that nature. You may have seen these attempts at community responding. Siemens opened up its platform for 3D printing and its manufacturing network for people who needed to, if you remember, print the masks and things of that nature that was necessary back in March 2020. Similarly, Ford in the US, in Michigan, they paired up with 3M, who kind of is good at making the materials for filters. So they created, so they worked on, along with the union at Ford, with the UAW, United Auto Workers, they created, because those people worked voluntarily to help create these things, 100,000 masks for the face, and using their filter, one of their kind of looking at ventilation, try to develop ventilators for people who are having difficulty, and they produced with 3M over 120 million masks. So that is a retool for a car company that is kind of quite impressive. One more here. So this is the open source community. So this is at GitHub. A lot of people showed up and tried to say, how can I help? In the little purple graph, you can see that on a very quickly, this is on a per capita basis. So a lot more people showed up. A lot more people who were already there started working to help with COVID. And that has stayed, that level of engagement has stayed over time. So many things were done, build the data sets needed to understand the COVID response. Thousands of repositories were built and build new tools to analyze it and things of that nature. This is probably my favorite. And this group of seeming baboons up there having fun is the Pandy Lab at Stanford University. And the professor is the one with the donkey ear in the back row. So that should be something for the professors to think about. And they basically they provide this software that networks that uses the power of your computer, your local home computer or your office computer, to basically help solve some of the problems, to help simulate the virus, basically. And the platform has been there since 2000. It's not a new idea. And you may have seen platforms like Search for Extraterrestrial Life, or there are many different things, but this is about protein folding to understand the evolution of viruses. So within days, people contributed almost 5 million CPUs, and over 1 million people participated. 1.2 million, I think, is last data I saw. And within days, it had achieved exaflops capacity, which is a lot faster. If you look at the little graph here, these are the fastest supercomputers in the world. And folding at home had exceeded their capacity by a factor of at least 10. And by April 2020, it had exceeded the power of the world top 500 supercomputers combined. So the group was able to start simulating the SARS-CoV-2 and find ways like what kind of spikes do you go after in your vaccination and so on. And this is done by people sitting at home and not necessarily by experts in biochemistry. And that's the beauty of this kind of effort. So you are part of that community, you are volunteering, you're helping solve the COVID crisis, yet you don't have to be an expert. How they organize is what interests me. And so they have some high-powered group of what they call them ambassadors, but they are really supporters. They each have taped a small message from just look at the top row, and that's enough to see the kind of people they have supporting them. They all find it they find it useful and helpful, so they all support this effort. And then they have, so there are a university lab, like any other university lab. And they have agency grants to support the students. All these people you saw in the pictures were mainly postdocs and students. They have high visibility corporate sponsors that you just saw. One of the things that a project like this one generates a huge amount of data, and they need to be stored for later analysis. They have many collaboration with other labs, but most important, they have the community. They have people who serve as moderators for the forums. They have people who translate. These are people who are, since it's an international effort, some programs and some data descriptors have to be translated. They have to keep guides and FAQs current. They have to have developers working and so on and so on. So it's quite an effective model, and not bad for a group of just a couple professors and a bunch of graduate students. So my last topic, and I'll try to be quick, is the limits of community innovation, and I want to address that before we end. So there has been this effort to open up the patents for COVID vaccines. And you see some important people suggesting it, that the normal rules of business cannot be, we can't operate under normal assumptions. Others have, there have been some recognition that COVID is a worldwide problem. And in poor countries, less than 2% of the population has been vaccinated. And so it's a long-term problem. And so free the vaccine is kind of the argument, and basically save lives by freeing the vaccine. So you see lots of calls, almost a large group of British Nobel laureates have called on the Prime Minister to waive the intellectual property protection. Another letter just last month was signed, 2 months ago, was signed by 170 former heads of states and Nobel laureates. And there's this push to say, all right, if we believe in community innovation and ecosystems for the good, we need measures. And even President Biden has come out with recognition that he could move on this. He was willing to waive intellectual property rights on the COVID vaccines, to be answered the next day. So he came out on May 5th. On May 6th, the president, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, did not endorse a plan, and kind of we have been blocked ever since. So you may have seen, if some of you have been observing this, that there has been this move to, instead of opening the vaccine protection, but to give more vaccines to initiatives like COVAX that will distribute in the third world. But again, this is a debate that is still ongoing. So there has been this push to go back to if you remember Jonas Salk, when he discovered the polio vaccine, back in the 50s, and it was a non-brainer that this should be given that it's a public good of such great value. It should be open and given to everybody. So So this is kind of the we're on the edge here of the opening ecosystems. So this is kind of the stuff that the arguments that have been made. I'm going to skip that for a second, but you know the arguments. So what is our lessons here? And so our lesson is that we need to go beyond an infrastructure perspective or a what is map type perspective to an emergent perspective on ecosystems. Of course, the community perspective is a valid one, but the community perspective also has certain implication in a sense that there is a set of community values that become important. In the open source movement, there have been, those of you who have followed the evolution of the open source movement, when certain corporations intervened in the open source movement, they were able to divert or take advantage of some of the work of the open source movement to their own benefits. So for example, take the Android operating system, which started out as an open source system and now is somehow the property of Google. So there have been kind of, we are not all the same. And we are not, when we participate in an ecosystem, and innovation creates winners and losers. And these people have influence over the political and institutional realm. So it's not a coincidence that you learn that Pfizer has made $3.5 billion of profits on COVID vaccines during the first 3 months of 2021. Moderna, again, on COVID vaccine made 1.7 billion. AstraZeneca, has not profited because they had made a pledge that as long as the pandemic goes on, they will not take a profit. So for us who research open innovation and think of communities of innovation, we need to start paying more attention to who benefits and who gets favored. And we need to bring to light these issues because they're too serious to be left aside. We often talk about communities and ecosystems as these feel-good places where somehow magically innovation takes place. It is actually a political arena of struggle, and we need to pay attention to these things as researchers. So it's not surprising that you'll hear me say that if you take a community perspective on all of this, then it's a whole society focus that should be the dominant one and should be nurtured. And I look forward to talking further with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Samer. Sorry. Thanks for the content, the clarity, and the depth of this exposé. We have already a lot of questions. I start with Lolita.
I would like to ask you, how do you see the input from smaller societies and communities in the world? Because it's like a challenge to be in a big community with different type of big industries, and if you have the question from a small country, and how do you feel they could give the value, added value, and how they would make a big input into the same problem solving process? Thank you.
Well, small countries are challenged when a crisis like this one brings out the power of large players, from large nations and powerful nations to large corporations and large institutions too. So I think for many small countries, the community perspective is a positive one because there are many small countries and there are not a lot of large countries with a lot of vested interests. So it is possible, by emphasizing the community aspect, that to create something valuable. So a UN-like structure, or in many of the international institutions, there is a need to include everybody. And if we look at innovation, often innovation starts at the margins. It often is not created at the core of the discussion, but from people who may be peripheral. So many, so that is a counterforce that will protect the value of small players and participants. I have not emphasized in my presentation, there just wasn't enough time to look at innovation that were created by participants who were in small places or non-central places. But I think one would see a lot of these things. So I'll take one example. The labs that were after, in the folding molecule example, a lot of the participant labs were from countries that were not core, and they provided a lot of the hard work and the help. And this is exactly where someone who's like a programmer or someone who has skills in biology can really intervene and help. And it's kind of where you are is not a barrier.
Thank you. Madan has a question, I think.
Yeah. Sameer, that's a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. My question for you is, these are very good, valuable lessons from the COVID experience. How many of these lessons can be applied in the future to climate change and these other kinds of crises? Any principles, any ethical frameworks can carry over? What do you think?
Yes, I was not thinking of this as specific to COVID. For me, I think just like you're thinking, there are principles that can be carried to other crises and other problems. So the emphasis on we're in this together is a valuable one for the environment and sustainability issues, just like it is for COVID. And for the same, and solution will not necessarily come from the core. Right, so a lot can be carried from the COVID example, and I think that we should align our thinking to try to see what can be built from the COVID example. I have not done the exercise yet, but I think a lot of what I just described could be carried to other crises.
Thanks.
Yeah. May I intervene on this point, Samer, about the question of property rights during the COVID? What you have shown to us is the creativeness of communities. What you have insisted on is maybe the conservative aspect of some corporations. But also, I think one party which is important is our government. And I think in the COVID situation, the government did not work together, and that's a pity. The reason could be the following: there are solutions called in economics patent buyout, which mean that the government could buy patents to companies to then diffuse the innovation to the world. This has been done in some domains, but this not have been done during the COVID because the government were not able, including through the World Health Organization, to go together and to buy the patent to the Pfizers and Modernas and so on, and then distribute for free the vaccine to the world. And I think this is a kind of responsibility of governments in the planet that were not able to find a solution which is a common solution for society. I don't know what you think of this.
I think we are likely to see, I agree with you, Patrick, that this is an important way forward, and we're likely to see, I'm hoping we can see a version of that come through. Given that only 2% of developing countries' population has been vaccinated, it's very hard to see how the economics are going to work out for these countries and how poor people are going to be able to afford the vaccine. So these vaccines have not necessarily been so when one looks at the nature of these vaccines, the technology they incorporate opens up a lot of possibilities for other solutions, other maybe a cancer intervention can take place, or there are other diseases, very serious diseases that can be dealt with via this technology. The technology was not solved by, was not developed by these companies. They were developed using public funding in universities, and these companies licensed the rights. So there has to be a lot more attention to that process through which that intellectual property became privatized and beyond the reach of governments or of society. And I think there is pressure. I think President Biden feels it. There's pressure from all over the world. And I think with time, that pressure is gonna hopefully force searching for a solution besides COVAX. COVAX is simply a Band-Aid for now, as a way to distribute the vaccine, make it available. But over time, we're gonna need solutions like what happened with the AIDS crisis and the drugs that were needed. And there were solutions worked out where companies allowed cheap versions or generic version to be manufactured to help the people inflicted by the disease. So I'm hopeful something will move on that front.
Oops. Thank you. Maybe a last question. We have a question from Muhammad. Muhammad.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. In open innovation, since communities and stakeholders and firms, they share the knowledge, ideas, and sometimes expertise and resources as well with each other. So my question is that how can we build trust in open innovation communities for productive innovation outputs, for sustainable innovation outputs, especially in inter-firm knowledge exchanges or even inter-actor context? Thank you very much.
It's a great question because it is the essential question. One of the things that is important is for all participants to realize that we're not one big happy community. We're all pulling together, and there has to be less of a rose-colored thinking by participants, and maybe participation in the community. There is some more responsibilities that come with it, or some sort of agreement as to what is appropriate, what is not. I have studied online communities for a long time, and a lot of people just show up and want to help and share, and they feel completely violated when they discover that there are people in that community who are just there to take advantage of their knowledge and to abuse their trust and their willingness to build the community. And so it's the same dynamic here. The actors may be different. They could be organizations, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations, and they discover they have different goals. There's a need to educate everyone who participates that the community is a public good that needs to be nurtured. It's not a private good to be exploited. I think once most participants understand that, they will, I think, be more supportive of the community and its goal. A community is a fragile thing. It can fall apart very easily. All the data shows that it's very easy to destroy a community. And so there needs to put in place guideposts or rules or organizing principles that will help sustain the community when it faces a bit of tension about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Samer. Thank you, everyone. I think it were excellent presentation and excellent questions. So I wish you the best. We have now a pause. Lucy, some final words, and see you very soon. Thanks again, Samer.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Samer. That was a terrific presentation.